Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Only Endometriosis podcast you need. Today, I'm going to be talking about the over-medicalisation of women's health, so of periods, of menstrual health, and of conditions like endometriosis. Now, obviously, conditions like endo and adenomyosis, polycystic ovaries, fibroids, all of those health conditions are serious health conditions. They are medical, chronic health conditions that have often incredibly debilitating symptoms. So I'm not going to take away the severity of what it is that we go through when we are diagnosed with those conditions. However, I do believe that the over-medicalisation of women's health in general has to be one of the fundamental parts of why women's health is treated so badly. Why there is this massive health gap in the UK. The government have acknowledged through the Women's Health Strategy and through the monthly updates now that we get in terms of work that's being done, there's real genuine recognition that there is a health gap here in the UK and essentially worldwide, but especially here in the UK. Women's health isn't treated as effectively as general health and men's health is/can be. And part of the issue I do believe is over-medicalisation of what we go through. Now, this is something that I mentioned in a podcast a few weeks ago, and I also did a presentation a couple of weeks ago at a networking group. And it's something that I said there when I was asked the question, why don't doctors take us seriously? And I genuinely believe that the problem is that we are completely, as a nation, as a culture, we are completely disconnected from our menstrual cycles. They are seen as something to put up with and something to be fixed once there's a problem. But there's absolutely no consideration in the medical world given to preventative care, preventative measures that you can take to nurture your menstrual cycle, to nurture your womb, and to really get on top of what is essentially the most beautiful natural process that we have. So in today's slightly ranty, but not overly ranty because I'm still struggling with this cold, podcast, we're going to be talking about what I mean by over-medicalisation, the impact that it has on us, and how we can shift the understanding of our cycles from viewing them as an inconvenience and a problem that we need to fix to really celebrating them again. And it's weird as well because when I talk to even young women, and I think back to when I started my periods when I was 12, and when I look back, it was always seen as an inconvenience. Even the talk at school, we were kind of separated. The boys went into one room, the girls went into another room, and we were given this incredibly awkward talk by this very austere lady who showed us all of these sanitary pads. And the language around kind of periods is again another podcast, but we were given these talks about sanitary pads and tampons and how once a month we were going to be in quite a lot of pain and we were going to be bleeding quite a lot, and it was just going to be horrendous, but that was just part and parcel of being a woman. And it struck fear, much like the menopause conversations that I hear happening now. It struck fear into the very heart of us women, of us girls. So right from the early age, we were told that periods were going to be an inconvenience. They were going to be something that hurt, and they were going to be something that we shouldn't celebrate, that we should be fearful and shameful of. And when we look at it in terms of a societal issue as well, this is something that's been going on for generations. So it was even worse when I talked to older women, different generations around periods. The older women say that we have it so good now, and the young girls coming through will have it so much better. And that is true. Attitudes are shifting, but we have such patriarchal systems in our healthcare and in our general, how society generally view even procreation, that it's going to be really, really hard for us to come back right the way, to shift the needle right the way back to nurturing our menstrual health and celebrating periods. So when I was doing this, the research for this project, and it might come as a shock to some of you to realise that I do actually carry out research for these podcasts. But when I was doing the research for this podcast, I actually decided to look at exactly how women's health was viewed back in the day. So without research, I'd kind of always assumed that we used to live, and when I say used to, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when women were actually celebrated and revered in society. And I thought back then, I just assumed me and my husband have this phrase where we say, well, you should never assume, and it's so true. But I'd assumed that women's periods then were completely seen as normal, completely socially acceptable, and again celebrated. And I know that when we look at some cultures and ancient cultures, that was absolutely the case. But actually, when I look at sort of the birth of modern medicine and what sort of came just before that, it's really, really easy to see where this over-medicalisation of women's health has come from. So when you look back, and I'm not going to get into all the names and all the ancient Greek people and stuff like that, but when I was looking back, just to see exactly how it's all started, there was a phrase that I think it was the ancient Greeks, but they used to use, called the wandering womb. And early medical theory, so people like Hippocrates, who obviously is the father of modern medicine with the Hippocratic Oath, and people who followed in his teachings, described the uterus as a wandering organ. So it described the uterus as almost like its own animal. So our wombs had a life of its own. It had the ability to move around our bodies freely, and that if it got angry or upset, it would cause us incredible illness. Now, I can kind of see where this came from, because it highlights the fact that we did have conditions like endometriosis. We had issues with our menstrual cycles, even way back then. But the very fact that the womb was seen as almost like this mythological creature, almost like a haggis, that just kind of had its own little life. I kind of like it. I kind of think it's quite cute. But it's terrifying to think that these were learned people. These were people whose authority we still revere today, whose philosophies, whose theories still bear out in modern medicine today. And they genuinely believed that our wombs were trampling right round our bodies, creating all of this havoc and chaos. And actually, the only thing we could do to remedy this was to calm them down, was to kind of appease them, which again is kind of weird, because it's kind of sort of things that I talk about today, and you'll see in a second, but it's a sort of some of the things that I talk about in terms of reducing inflammation, in terms of reducing pain. You can kind of see a link, but I just find it hilarious that they think it's like this haggis kind of. I've said that, obviously Hippocrates didn't, never once, from what I can make out, liken it to a haggis. But I just think it's hilarious that there's this little picture of this little angry haggis running around our abdominal cavities causing absolute haywire, causing absolute havoc. But back then, women's health was seen as completely mysterious. They didn't talk about women's health in any kind of meaningful way. It was seen as mythological almost. It needed external regulation. So what they decided to do, what they used to do for women's health, was things like smelling salts. So when you talk about smelling salts, that was actually something that happened, or that started way back in, again, ancient Greek, ancient Roman times, where they would sniff smelling salts, and the smelling salts, the intense aroma, the intense reaction from the smelling salts would have the effect on this haggis-type womb of almost like jolting it into submission. So that was where the original ideas from smelling salts came. It's absolutely fascinating when you start to look at it. But really, that's where kind of things happen. That's where things started to, in my view, go completely wrong. There was never proper research. It was never seen as a male body. It was never given that scientific, that research-based approach that the male body was given. It was seen as this mythological, mysterious, problematic thing that just had to go away. And we've never kind of moved on from that necessarily. We were taught from school age that these periods were not something to talk about, that they were these mythological things that were going to hurt. They were going to be a source of embarrassment for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we've kind of never left that mindset that periods are just these things that are there that we have to deal with. And thankfully, we've kind of walked away from this idea that the womb is uncontrollable and untamable, although I kind of do like the idea that part of us is completely wild. And I would like to I am going to explore that, and I would like to do a bit more about that. So if you're interested in that, I'd love to speak to you. Or if you know about it, if you're a student of bygone medical eras, I'd love to connect with you and just hear about what you think about it. But anyway, I digress. So that's where it all started. It started from a discomfort and some sort of reticence to look further into women's health, into women's bodies, to see them as scientific, or to see them as something that could be learnt from and that could be supported, that the health could be supported. And because we've never had that interim solution, essentially, and I'm going to skip forward a few hundred years, but essentially what's happened is we've gone right from these concepts of these mythologically illnesses and ailments, this wandering womb, this womb that's causing all this havoc, but we don't really know what to do with it other than kind of beat it into submission, literally speaking. That is actually true. I read a thing where I can't remember which culture it was, but literally if a woman was struggling, they used to punch the stomach of the woman to try and sedate the womb. Terrifying. Or something like smelling salts to kind of relax it, in inverted commas. So we've kind of gone from that to chemical medicines. So we kind of, from what I can make out, we've kind of skipped that middle bit. We've kind of lost the bit where we think of our wombs as just another part of our body. And it's really interesting. And I had this conversation actually really recently with a recent client about how we don't view our not just our wombs, but essentially everything in that area. We don't view that as part of our body. So when I was talking to this lovely client, she's absolutely beautiful, inside and out, but I was talking to this client about the muscles around it was kind of the muscles that essentially go through our abdomen, and how we can avoid a lot of pain, we can manage a lot of pain by relaxing these muscles, because essentially a lot of the pain that we experience when we've got endometriosis is caused by tension in these muscles, and not just endometriosis actually, but kind of menstrual pain in general, can be caused by tension in these muscles and the soft tissue around it. And I was sort of likening it to if you had a sore neck. Now, we wouldn't think twice about using massage techniques, about using breath work, about using muscle relaxation techniques on the muscles in our shoulders and the muscles in our backs or our legs or hamstrings after we've been for a run. We wouldn't think twice about using them. But when it comes to these muscles in our abdomens, we're really, really wary. People are incredibly nervous about anything that goes on in our tummies. And it's the same when I'm teaching abdominal massage. It's the same when I'm teaching the Amno-Pheo abdominal massage. People get really anxious about these massages, and of course there's rules, best practice rules to follow. You don't push the food through the bowel, so you always work in a way that works with the bowel, so you're not kind of creating so the food essentially isn't coming back into bits of the bowel that it shouldn't be going back into. You also don't force the food through, so whatever's trapped, you break it down and you move it through gently. You don't force anything. If it's sore, you ease off the pressure. It's genuine common sense. And we kind of lost a little bit of that with sports massages, when people go for these sports massages and chiropractic sessions and it all really hurts and it feels like the no pain, no gain culture. That's absolutely not what we do with abdominal massage. It's a very, very gentle, very gentle, I suppose, massage that connects to the person and to the body that you're massaging. But it's incredibly, that part of the body is incredibly robust, and it's very, very difficult to do any sort of damage if you're massaging exactly the same as the back. And it's very strange because you wouldn't think twice about jumping on a foam roller or massaging the back of your legs or your neck. But for some reason, there's this hesitancy, there's this reticence around the abdomen. And that is because we are not really told about it. We're told, I suppose we're not told, but we're still kind of in this mindset that our abdominal cavities, that our wombs, that our uterus, that our ovaries, everything down there is very, very delicate. It's very breakable. And it's something that has to be whispered about just in case that maybe this haggis type thing might hear and get angry. When actually the reality is that it's just the same as any other body part. It is quite robust, There's loads of stuff you can do to keep it well and keep it healthy. We don't have to go straight to the medicine, because that's part of the problem. When we are struggling with our menstrual health symptoms, when we're getting pain, when we're getting bloating, when we're getting IBS type symptoms, there isn't anything written down really that kind of says, for us or for doctors, well, this is actually what a healthy cycle looks like. And these are natural ways that you can bring your cycle back into balance. Most of the women I work with who are experiencing symptoms of endometriosis, problem periods, fibromyalgia, well, that's kind of true as well, but fibroids and polycystic ovaries, most of these women have had symptoms for years. And most of them have looked into it as well. It's not that we sit around not doing anything, just wondering about it. Most of us do look into it. But there isn't anything that says, well, okay, if you connect to your womb on a daily basis, if you practice abdominal breathing, if you put your hands on your tummy while you're doing your breath work, if you do these light massage techniques, especially if you do them around XYZ point of your cycle, this is going to help your periods flow more easily. If you eat a more natural diet, if you are struggling with your symptoms, if you eat a more natural diet, if you stay away from this kind of food at this time of your cycle, then that will make it a little bit easier as well. If you're struggling with X, Y, and Z, then here's A, B, and C that can help. That information just isn't routinely available. A lot of it is speculation. A lot of it, I'm sad to say, is marketing ploys to get you to buy fancy supplements or to get you to sign up to the latest fad diet. There isn't actually a lot of good quality, decent information out there about actually how to reconnect and rebalance your cycles. If that information was out there, if it wasn't seen as a medical problem when things went wrong, then a lot more women, I do genuinely believe, a lot more women would be spared the agony of actually getting to the point where they were diagnosed with things like endometriosis. Because, like I say, essentially what happens now is we go to the doctors, everything's seen as normal, everything's just we'll keep an eye on it until this happens. And then when this happens, we jump straight to the medication. And even the medication isn't actually medication. So it hasn't changed in the 20 plus years since I went through this journey. But what tends to happen if you go to the doctors about your periods and you are diagnosed with something, or even before the diagnosis, as part of that diagnosis journey, you're just popped on the pill. Now, the pill was never designed to be medication. The pill isn't designed to help endometriosis. It's not designed to cure polycystic ovaries. It's there for contraception. That's why it's licensed in the UK, and obviously it's licensed now as a medicine, but that wasn't its primary objective, and it still isn't its primary objective. They just found that kind of a lot of women, if you stop bleeding, that stops the symptoms. It doesn't actually stop what's going on in the background necessarily, just stops the pain because you're stopping the bleeding. So we're not actually given medication, we're just given medication with a small m. We're medicated with a small m. By chemicals that people think will help, that doctors think will help. And of course it does in some cases. I can't poo-poo it completely because it's a massive godsend for women, for many women. The coil, I know, helps thousands of women. For some women it doesn't, but again, that was never meant to be a medication. HRT, I see the same thing when we're talking about menopause. Women view HRT, and HRT obviously is a medication. It's a licensed medication for menopause. It's hormone replacement therapy to replace the hormones that are depleted during menopause. But again, it's seen as the answer by a lot of women. Now, this is changing. The rhetoric is changing, and it's not the women's fault. It's the education around how we perceive menopause. But I've worked with women who have had surgically induced menopause, whose symptoms of menopause start encroaching on their life, and then who are put on HRT to flip the side effects of the menopause without any consideration for the hormonal imbalances that caused the symptoms in the first place that led to the hysterectomy. It's all a little bit mismatched, and it's all a little bit too medicalised, but without those real medical answers that we have. So, how do we bring it back to what I know, and what people who do what I do know, that works. How do we reconnect to our menstrual cycles? How do we bring that balance and that nature and that love back to our menstrual cycles? So the first thing you can do, and it's really, I find it quite annoying now because I do it all the time, and it's a lot better than it used to be. But the first thing you can do is kind of start to recognize and notice when women's cycles are portrayed as anything other than what they are. So we used to have the period pad adverts where they'd use blue water. At least we've got red water now, so it's a little bit more realistic. But notice things like that. Notice language. Notice the language about feminine hygiene, about sanitary products, and start to reframe that in your mind. Start to say period pads. Start to say period pants. Call it what it is. Call it periods. Call it menstruation. However the language you feel comfortable, and that will change as you get more used to it. But start noticing where society is telling us that periods are negative. Also, as well, we see a lot of the time when we're talking about periods, there seem to be a mark of youth, if that makes sense. So we talk about women in terms of being more beautiful when they're young, being more beautiful when they're productive, if you get what I mean, fertile, essentially, and sort of preserving the youth of women. And it sounds bonkers, but actually this is a really, really damaging myth, because it subconsciously tells us that women who have issues with their periods, who have issues with their monthly bleeds, in inverted commas, who have issues, who have early menopause, who have enforced menopause, start to then think that they are less worthy. This image of a man aging gracefully, but a woman being past her best, all of the money that we put into being youthful, being fertile as women, sends a very, very damaging message to us, especially when that's coupled with the negativity around periods. We're getting such mixed messages. So the first thing you can do is just notice those messages. Notice how often we're getting fed the messages that to be youthful and beautiful and fertile as a woman is the ultimate. But the flip side, that periods are dirty, periods are things to be stuffed away in the bottom drawer of your medicine cabinet in the bathroom and not talked about. So the more you recognise that kind of approach, the more you recognise that language, the more you shift your own rhetoric away from that, you flip your own rhetoric, you reframe it, the more positive you feel about your cycles generally. When we talk about our wombs, again, there's lovely things you can do to connect to your womb. When we talk about that connection with our womb, a lot of us have lost it. And I class myself in this as well. I used to do a lot of sport when I was younger. I used to be in a lot of sports teams, and having your period was a massive disadvantage, especially if it happened early or it was heavier than expected, and you would really get that, oh no, feeling. Try and reframe that as well if you can. Welcome your periods. Even if you are struggling with your symptoms, try to your very best, and that's all we can ever ask of ourselves. Just try to your very best to welcome your period and to celebrate your period. If you don't already, try using a menstrual cup. I know that the thought of it turns some women's stomach, but I genuinely believe it's one of the most powerful things you can do to reconnect to your periods. It's incredibly eye-opening just how much, or how little, if you will, we actually bleed. Now, I have heavy periods. They're getting lighter as I enter into my own natural perimenopause. But historically, I've had really heavy periods. And if you'd have asked me how much I used to bleed, I'd have put it in like the pint glass kind of area. But actually, when you're changing your menstrual cup, you can't help but notice how much blood is in there, and you are definitely reconnecting with your menstrual cycles. So if you can try it for 3 cycles. I always say try everything for 3 cycles, monitor stuff for 3 cycles, but just try it for a few periods and just see how you go. But it is a really nice way of reconnecting to and they're so much easier to use as well. And then as well, we have all the apps, so you can track your cycle, because this is something else that I'm going to do a podcast on as well, about knowing when you're ovulating and knowing how your menstrual cycle turns up, because every woman is different. There's no such thing as a menstrual cycle. But use those apps to really track, really kind of tune into your menstrual cycle. Quite often, and again, I'm guilty of this, quite often, in fact, what I do now is just record the first day of my bleed. That's all I do now. I've gone from being absolutely, completely pedantic and obsessed with recording my periods on these apps, and I now just literally do day one of my bleed. That's all I do. So if you're like me and you're a bit lackadaisical about sticking your periods and your menstrual cycles on these apps, just again try for 3 cycles where you're really focusing in, answer all the questions on the app, do all the things they're asking you to do to really tune in, and do the more spiritual reconnections as well. We talk a lot, or you hear, I don't know what circles you move in, but I hear a lot about the sort of the archetypal goddesses and these traditional views of women, and it's lovely, it's absolutely beautiful. And if you do have a space, if you're wanting to take up some sort of knowledge or some sort of mind expansion this year, then do look into sort of the archetypal goddesses and stuff. But even if you're not particularly interested in that, if you can lean into kind of some of that divine femininity, so literally connecting with your womb, put your hand over your womb, exactly like I said before, just press down really, really lightly, just so you can start to feel the pressure, feel the warmth from your hand, and breathe, just gently breathing. If you can do that when you're lying down, that's lovely. If you can do it when you're stood up barefoot outside, that's even more lovely. It might look a bit weird to the neighbours, but it's a lovely way just to reconnect, connect to your womb, feel that connection to your womb. When I'm working with women, I actually invite them to talk to their womb as well. So be gentle with your womb. If it's hurting, soothe it exactly the way you would soothe a child, or a wayward haggis if you happened to come across a wayward haggis. By the way, I do know that haggises aren't animals. It's a standing joke. My mum's Scottish, so we always joke about haggis hunting and haggis as animals. So before you get in touch with me, I do know that a haggis isn't an animal. And I probably should have said that right at the outset. But anyway, tune into your womb, soothe your womb like you would a wayward haggis, and just talk to it really, really gently. And it sounds daft, it may even feel daft the first few times you do it, but actually what you're doing is just a beautiful, genuinely authentic way of self-care at its deepest level. Meditation as well. If you do meditation, a really nice meditation is actually just to picture your womb, and it doesn't have to be your actual womb. Obviously, you've never seen your womb, unless, actually, quite a lot of us have in many pictures, but it doesn't actually have to be your womb. Just picture what you think your womb looks like, and it could be a haggis, it could be a beautiful heart-shaped shape, it could be anything. But as you're meditating, just connect to your womb and just picture what you think your womb looks like. And if it's angry, just imagine if it's like a ball of fire, which I had one client say recently to me, when I said, how do you picture your womb? She's like, oh, like an angry ball of fire. So all we did was work to quench that fire, just reduce that fire down. Just connect to the womb. Do things like yoga, qigong, journal as well, and notice how your energies change through your menstrual cycle. If you journal how you're feeling, if you journal your emotional journey every cycle, but also journal about how your womb is feeling, how your period is feeling, how your menstrual cycle is feeling. Just reconnect. The more we understand about our cycles, the more we connect to our cycles, the more in control of our cycles we are, and the more preventative we can be when it comes to our period issues. So, I hope this has helped. I hope it's been interesting. I'm going to do a few more podcasts in this area. It won't all be about that, and it won't all be sort of consecutive weeks either. So there's a couple of endometriosis related podcasts coming up. There's a few more different things as well. But splattered in there will be a few more rants, but also a few more divine feminine kind of things. So if there's any questions you have on anything like that, please do get in touch with me. Just to say at the end of this podcast that menstrual cycles are not problems to be solved. They're not medical mysteries. They're not as a result of some weird little animal running around pretending to be a womb. They are really, really powerful sources of energy, of creativity, and of productivity. And if we start to reframe as a society, if we start to reframe our menstrual cycles like this, and we start to reconnect, we start to regain that power, we start to lose the mysticism. We kind of want to maintain a little bit of the mysticism, but lose it in terms of the damaging way. And it then becomes easier for us to take control, and like I say, to be able to spot when something's wrong. So we're not waiting until it does become a medical issue. We are in control way more than ever before. If you do need help with this, then you know where I am. If you would like to chat to me, then just head to my website. You can connect with me on Substack as well if you're not already. I have a free thing on there that's essentially a health... Actually, no, that's the paid one. Ignore that. You get this podcast, and then you get a Monday morning prompt, and then I'm going to be doing some ad hoc live broadcasts as well. Maybe even on video if I'm feeling brave. We'll see how that goes. No set time or anything, that's just as and when I've got a spare 5 minutes. And then there is a paid option as well for £6 a month. You can join the monthly health clinics, the rest, relax and reset sessions every month, and also a workshop every month as well, and that's just for £6. So head over to find Halcyon Days or me, Sarah Darwin, on Substack if you'd like to find out more about that. I wish you every happiness wherever you are on your menstrual cycle, wherever you are on your endometriosis journey. And if you do need me, then please do reach out. As ever, stay happy and stay warm.